Good evening and welcome to Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. Thanks for joining us. Iowa News and Views is a bona fide news interview program. It's seen in 15 communities around the state of Iowa, about 370,000 households and about 1 million viewers. That is, if everybody in each of those households is watching every show, and we hope they are. We're interested in your ideas for guests and content for this show, and we'll be giving you some information in a few minutes about how to send us some information, so stay tuned. We have an interesting program this evening. We're going to be visiting about education in Iowa. Iowa has been known for years as leading the nation in its education system. In fact, we've been ranked #1 for quite some time, actually up until about the last 3 years, and I believe right now Iowa ranks third or is tied for third in the nation in its educational system. It's a concern to Iowans, and it's one we're going to talk about tonight. Our guest is State Representative Mary Mascher. Mary's a Democrat from Iowa City, happens to be my state representative. It's great to have you on the show tonight, Mary.
Glad to be here, thank you.
Mary is also the ranking member on the House Education Appropriations Committee. She's also on the full Education Committee. She's also has a personal interest. She's taught in the Iowa City Community School District for the last 21 years, so has some real hands-on experience, as well as having been in the legislature for, I believe, 6 years?
This is my fourth fourth year.
Very good. It's great to have you with us. The legislature just ended in the last couple of weeks. Education was clearly one of the top issues. How would you grade the legislature on its work on education this last session, Mary?
Well, if you look at our grading scale and talk about A, B, C grades, I'd say at best it was a C, at best. If one of the comments from another legislator was, if this was the year of education, thank goodness we don't have too many, because I don't think education can take that kind of hit year after year. It was supposed to be a year where we were going to do many exciting things in terms of reforming our educational system, and what we did was a lot of window dressing. There's not a lot of substance to what was actually done in terms of what was passed in the Ed Reform Bill, and what was sorely lacking was money. Obviously you can't do those kinds of reforms and have a big impact on kids unless you're willing to pay for it, and I think the House Republicans were willing to say they weren't.
Sure. So what were some of the major issues of the session on education?
Well, obviously we were looking at an Ed Reform Bill that was based on the Pomerantz Commission report. And Pomerantz came up with a group of people from across the state that were educational experts, and they came up with recommendations that they felt were important in having an impact on education in the state, and basically what we could do to help children at a very early age. We know a lot about brain research and the fact that the earlier we can reach children, the better off they're going to be when they get to the school door. So one of the pieces that we were looking at was a piece that had to deal with 0 to 5 age level of children. And that particular piece has to deal with the empowerment boards that we were going to talk about later, but I'll be glad to mention and talk a little bit about now in light of the fact that they are important. First of all, and probably the most wonderful thing about them is that they're voluntary. If a group of people within a county are interested and willing to come together to bring a proposal to the state, they have that opportunity, and then they therefore will be given money at that 0 to 5 level to be able to implement programs, whether it's more money for child care services, more money for daycare workers, whatever they would like to see done at that local level.
So it's local decision making about how to appropriate money. Very good.
And I think that's the beauty in it. If people are willing to come together and work together for that common goal, the money will be there for them.
So it would be like the school district, the county board, any player that might be doing any kind of service to families and children could be involved in the empowerment zone.
One of the critical pieces is that the majority of the people on that board will have to be citizens. So they did not want to have a disproportionate number of people that would be representing agencies or county government or city government or the school districts. And so I think that's an important piece also, is that it will be reflective of the people in the community, because that's who will be a part of that commission.
Okay, so some communities might elect to do empowerment zones and others might not.
Correct.
For those that don't, how will they access those state funds? It sounds like there's going to be some block grant money to the empowerment zone to spend at the local level.
What we're looking at is building on past successes. Many people are familiar with our decategorization projects that have been implemented in every county in the state, I think, except for one. And those programs were initiated by the Department of Human Services with the help of the local agencies, whether it was juvenile court officers or whoever else would be involved, sometimes school districts, sometimes not. That was one piece. Another piece was the innovation boards, and those zones are also throughout the state. Not all counties are a part of those, but what we were looking at is building upon those two areas that already exist throughout the state and having those agencies or groups of people they may have to add a few more people to their zones or boards, but then they would be able to hit the ground running in terms of making the grant proposals and getting those into the state level. If they don't have those in existence now, what the state is willing to do is provide assistance to those groups of people who are interested in doing that but need help in getting that initiated or started.
I see. So that deals with 0 to 5-year-olds.
Correct.
What about K through 3?
One of the things that we were also looking at, for the 0 to 5, it's 5.2 million, and then we're also looking at some federal dollars. For the K through 3 part of this proposal, we're looking at a $9 million figure, and that would be divided on a per pupil basis throughout the entire state of Iowa. No district would receive less than $7,500 in that particular area. And then those monies would go for a variety of things. Again, the local school board would be able to make that decision, but it could go towards reducing class sizes. It could be towards all-day, everyday kindergarten in buildings and districts where they don't have it. It could be for reading recovery programs. Reading recovery is a very intensive program for children in that first grade level where they can get one-to-one attention and help them get on their feet. And so it could be used for monies and programs like that. So again, it's up to the local district on what they want to use it for, but the $9 million figure is there. Our big concern is whether the governor is going to veto this or not. There are some provisions in this reform bill that obviously Democrats didn't support. The Democrats did not support the ed reform package as it was and the way it came out of the House. Our biggest concerns were the merit pay proposal, which we felt was very regressive, and it did not help the educational community at all in terms of making teachers better teachers. There wasn't enough money in that, and that's one of the problems that Governor Branstad has with it right now. The other piece was a piece called the Frontier School Proposal. We kind of called them cowboy schools or prairie schools because we're not quite sure what they look like or what they'll actually do, but we do know one thing. One of the provisions in it would gut the collective bargaining law. And Chapter 20 is something that educators in this state have felt very strongly about and have felt worked very well. And in that particular instance, they would not have to abide by anything in Chapter 20. So they could be hired and fired at will. Teachers would have no recourse or recall rights. They wouldn't have any grievance procedures. Those kinds of things were important and we felt were missing. We also were concerned about the fact that we're not sure it's a quality program for kids. When you look at, they are not having to abide by state standards regarding math and science and social studies and language arts. And those state standards are there for a reason. We felt they're pretty important, or we wouldn't have put them there in the first place. And so they would not have to abide by any of that. And so we're not sure what kind of an animal this will actually look like, but in our eyes, we didn't see much benefit in it. Schools can do that today. The only difference is we have provisions in the code that allow them to do experimental kinds of programs, and many school districts across the state are doing them now. Alternative programs and night schools and just a number of different kinds of provisions. That we think is already in place. The new piece was getting the collective bargaining law.
Right. The frontier schools sound like a very interesting idea. I mean, if the goal is to get back to #1 in the nation in education, that seems like an idea that's going to go in the other direction, to have schools that have no standards and concern about quality of what's actually going to be provided to young people.
You hit it on the head, and that's why Democrats voted no on that provision.
What about teachers' pay? I know that's been an issue in Iowa. We rank, what, 34th or 37th or something?
It's 36th, the last number I had seen.
Sure.
But again,
was that an issue this session?
it certainly was. And what they did to address it was to raise the minimum teacher salary. It has been $18,000 for quite a few years in Iowa, and they were increasing it to $23,000. Now that on its merits may sound like it's a really good plan. The problem with it is that they did nothing to address the veteran teachers, the teachers who have been in the ranks for quite some time. And what happens is when you increase the minimum and don't increase the rest of the salary schedule all the way through, you get a condensing. So people who've worked 10 years may make $1,000 or $2,000 more than somebody who is just starting out. And the equity there does not seem to be real, and it's something that I think a lot of teachers are concerned with across the state. Obviously, we need to increase teachers' pay, but we need to do it across the board, not just for beginning teachers, but for teachers who have been in the field and the profession for quite some time.
Yeah, that's it. The equity issues is an important issue.
It also, can I just make another comment, Joe? One of the things it does is it really does a lot to reinforce small school districts, because it doesn't benefit any school districts in the top 10 that are the largest districts in the state. They're already paying 23 or more now. And so what it does is, again, bolster up school districts that may need to be merging, may need to be looking at consolidating with districts next to them. And so we kind of push that back again too by not having them admit you need to do something to help your teachers locally, and you have the ability to do that by consolidating with local school districts and doing more of that sharing.
We have about $3.4 billion in unmet infrastructure needs, and it seems that the legislature did enact legislation to allow school boards essentially to enact local option sales tax.
Correct.
And what was the discussion like around that, and is that the best way to fund infrastructure needs?
Very, very few cities or school districts in the state are going to benefit from that for a number of reasons. One, adding taxes at any level is not very popular, and so to get anything like that through is not going to be something that is going to be supported overwhelmingly. The only area that we're finding that is really pushing and was supporting it was Sioux City, and they're ones that already have a local option sales tax. They needed something desperately for their school district, and this was their solution. Unfortunately, it's a regressive tax, and so it's one that penalizes people on the lower end of our economic scale. So that is not helpful in itself. Democrats were talking about a combination of income and property tax, so that if you did a combination of that, you could do a bond issue at a 50% level as opposed to a 60% level. Couldn't get any support for that in terms of the Republican Party, so that did not go anywhere. Would have been much more progressive in terms of helping those people on the lower end of the income scale.
Sure. You're watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. Our guest this evening is State Representative Mary Mascher, Democrat from Iowa City. We're talking about education. I'd like to tell you about our website. The show has a website. It has a lot of interesting information on it. Most recently, some background on our discussions with TCI of Central Iowa and some concerns that they had about the program. You can read about it at our webpage. Also, we'll give you our email address. We're interested in hearing from you. If you've got email, send us a message. We're interested in your ideas for guests and content for the show. If you're interested in being a guest, we'd like to hear from you. And remember, no flipping. We're about halfway through. Back to the funding question. We have a big income tax cut this year again. And we talk about education and trying to get back to #1 in the country in our education system. How can we continue to underfund things and expect that our young people are going to be able to meet the challenges of employment in the future?
And you hit it on the head. I don't think we can. I think you're going to have to pay for it now or pay for it later. And what we're finding is many of our young people are leaving this state. They may get their education here, but then the jobs are elsewhere, and we're not able to provide those jobs for them. We need to be looking at ways to, again, partner with school-to-work initiatives and to do more in that particular area, but also to try to keep our kids here in Iowa and to find out what kinds of things we need to provide to do that, whether it's recreational, whether it's cultural events and opportunities that they may not have in some of the rural areas in Iowa. We need to be looking at what can we do to provide those jobs and to provide the adequate training and then to keep them here, because they are our future, and if we don't have that pool of people, we as a state are going to be in real trouble.
Sure. When we talk about, there's a term, children at risk, and one of the areas that sounds like we put some money in is trying to deal with K through 3. And how are we doing with the youngest of our children in terms of prenatal to 3 years of age, even I guess before school begins, in terms of trying to address readiness and just childcare and those kinds of issues?
Well, one of the reasons I didn't give the legislature a failing grade is because there was a bipartisan proposal for children's health insurance. It's called the SHIP program, and it was one that I felt very strongly about in light of the fact that 55,000 children across this state that didn't have health care will now have that as of July 1st. And it's something that we as a state have been negligent on for quite some time. So we need to be looking at children's needs obviously before they hit the schoolhouse door, but that gets into nutrition, that gets into wellness checks and making sure that parents are not having to choose between making the rent payment and taking their child to the doctor, or getting them medicine when they need it and paying the food bill. You know, those are the kinds of decisions our families have been having to make, and it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to put them in that position. So this Children's Health Initiative, I think, is extremely important, and one that I feel very good about in terms of something that we did on a very positive note that I think will have a big impact on kids in the state.
So the bill's in front of the governor now. It's May 4th today, and he'll have approximately another month or so to sign off on that. Is he going to sign the legislation? And there's been discussion about a special session. Do you think that'll happen?
I don't know. Do you have a coin in your pocket, Joe? I think we're going to have to flip a coin on this one. He's gotten lots of lobbying both ways now. A lot of school districts are very concerned because they're afraid they could do a lot worse.
I see.
And if they don't have it done now and have him sign this bill, that he may take away from some of those things that are really important to them, like the 0 to 5 piece with the empowerment zones and the K-3 piece that would be the $9 million allotment for the K-3 grant. So those kinds of things I think are making districts very nervous. They're feeling like if we don't get him to sign this, what he comes up with next time, and the Republicans are saying in the House and in the Senate both, we've gone as far as we can go. We're not going to do any more. So unless a deal is worked out ahead of time, it doesn't make much sense for us to be called back because they won't get anything more than what they have now.
Mary, you've been involved in education as a teacher for 21 years. You've served in the legislature. You have a keen interest and knowledge of these issues. What is your vision for the future of education in Iowa? What kinds of things would you like to see us be doing?
Well, there's some very exciting things going on in our schools today, and I think we need to capitalize on them, look at things that have been successful with parent partnerships, getting parents more involved with their children's education, making them feel like they're an equal partner in it, and whether that means family resource centers where they're coming into schools and feeling like this is my community center. It's not something that I have to wait until my child gets into school to be able to participate in. I can come there when my child is 1 year old or 2 years old and to be able to use the facilities there. I think children who are potentially going to go to that school ought to be able to use those library materials and services that the children that go to that school are also be able to use. I'd like to see more done with alternative education. We have lots of very good alternative programs in this state. We are looking at some very at-risk children whose needs are not being met in our schools. We need to find out what will best meet those needs, and then how can we develop programs that will address the issues of violence and kids who are disruptive and are causing difficulties for other kids then to learn. So we need to be able to meet those needs and mainstream them back into the classrooms as soon as possible, but also looking at where is the violence coming from and what can we do to teach them other ways to deal with that. The other thing that I look at, I'd like to see our schools open more. they should be community centers, and they should be available for all people in that community, not just the population that is going to that school at that time. And I think we ought to be looking at opening our computer labs. We spend a great deal in this state on technology, but we look at those school buildings close at 3 o'clock, except for the before and after school programs, which again we need more of. But then we don't see anybody using those computers and that technology, and they could be open and available not only for our elementary age children, but for our junior high, high school, and our adults that are in those neighborhoods as well. It seems like those are all taxpayer dollars, and we ought to be looking at ways of bridging that gap and making that seem like this is their school, their neighborhood location.
So we have some distinct differences, it seems to me, between the House Democrats and the House Republicans, probably on some of these issues. Next January, when you go back, what will be a couple of the priorities that you'll work on as in the Democratic majority, hopefully?
A couple of them that come right to mind are the school to work initiatives. We've had some wonderful ones on the books that we've been unwilling to fund. And again, it seems illogical to put something there and put it in place and yet not give school districts some money and the tools to be able to implement. So that's one of the things that I think is very positive. I have a son who was able to benefit from a program like that. He was involved in an automotive technology program in high school, then went on to Kirkwood and finished up a 2-year degree in automotive tech, but also during that time was given dollars for tools and also working in the community in terms of getting that work experience. So we need to be providing more of those internships and more of those opportunities for our students.
Very good. We're about down to our final minute here. In terms of priorities for next year, and we potentially are looking at Governor Lightfoot. How is he going to interact with education issues?
I am very frightened about the proposal of having a Governor Lightfoot. I do not think you will see a positive or more of a commitment to education, and I think it could be less of a commitment, and that worries me a great deal.
Great. Mary, appreciate you being on this evening.
Thank you.
It's that time on the program for the People's Podium, and that's where we invite somebody in to visit with us. And tonight we're very happy to have with us Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate, David Osterberg. And David is going to be talking about a topic we had on a couple weeks ago, and that's water quality. And we talked a couple weeks ago about the need in Iowa to begin to monitor our surface waters and our waters in general. David's going to visit with us this evening about nitrates. David.
Thanks, Joe. Recently, the city of Farmington, Iowa, experienced something they don't want to experience. They had to tell their residents not to drink the water. What had happened is spring agricultural runoff from the Des Moines River had made that system unsafe. Now here's another issue. Only a few years ago, we had a program in Iowa which actually worked with farmers to reduce the amount of nitrogen they were putting on their crops. I want to put these two things together this evening. Now, first of all, high levels of nitrate in Iowa rivers have a number of causes. Some is sewage treatment plants discharging into the rivers. Some are livestock facilities. There's probably some application of nitrates on lawns that make it through the storm sewer into the rivers, but mainly it comes from application of nitrogen fertilizer. The Des Moines Register had a story about this recently, and they showed that this year's nitrate levels were the highest they have been recently. And the reasons they cite are low prices on nitrogen fertilizer last fall, resulting in an over-application of nitrogen fertilizer, sort of an insurance program to get better yields, a warm fall and winter that encouraged nitrates to form in the soil, and a wet late winter and early spring that washed those nitrates into the streams. Now, the nitrate concentrations experienced in Farmington are dangerous to women who are pregnant, and it's also very dangerous to infants. When water systems get levels that high, they have to respond somehow. When Iowa City finds those levels, they mix groundwater with their surface water. In Des Moines, they have a very expensive treatment system that they turn on and run at thousands of dollars per day. But with Farmington, they had to do bottled water. Now, that's point one. Point two, 1992 is the last year for a program which worked with farmers to try to reduce the amount of fertilizer nitrogen going on. I helped write that program. It was part of the 1987 Groundwater Protection Act. The program worked with farmers. It demonstrated to farmers that there was a way that they could get good yields without applying so much nitrogen fertilizer. They could save money and do good for the environment at the same time. We know it was a good program because in 1991 there was a study done at the University of Iowa and at Iowa State University. And what they showed is that if you compare 1985 and 1991, there was a 20% reduction in applications of fertilizer. That is quite significant. It's $40 million saving to Iowa farmers over a 2-year period. The study was done by Dennis Keeney at the Leopold Center and George Hallberg that used to be here at the University of Iowa. And they compared not only 1985 and 1991 in Iowa, but also in Illinois. And what they found is in Illinois, which did not have a similar program, they did not get the reduction. In fact, they had an increase, and Illinois got nothing for that increase in fertilizer. 1985, 1991, with 20% less fertilizer applied in Iowa, no effect on yields. Illinois putting all kinds of extra fertilizer, no effect on their yields. It was simply wasted. Consequently, we had a good program, but we got rid of it. And in 1996, when we looked at the situation again, those levels had moved right back up to where they had been before. We lost all of that ground. And now we talk about high nitrates happening in the waters in Iowa once again. We had a program and we got rid of it. The legislature and the governor got tired of funding this program and went on to other things. Even though it was amazingly successful, we got rid of it. Which leads me to conclude with something that environmentalists already know, and that is, and how many times do we have to figure it out, that an ounce of prevention is worth pounds and pounds of after-the-fact work that you have to do when you didn't do it right in the first place. That's my comments.
Great. Thank you very much, David. Appreciate that. Good luck with your efforts. You've been watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'd like to again thank Mary Mascher for being with us.
Thank you, Joe.
Good luck with you. Yeah, great, thanks. I'd also like to thank Bob and Maisie Darby, who have been significant supporters of the show and recently, and just like to thank them for their strong support. I'd also like to thank our sponsors around the state that make it possible for us to be on, and thank our viewers, of course, for tuning us in. Also, don't forget, June 2nd is a primary in Iowa for both the Democratic and Republican parties, and don't forget to get out there and vote. Next time we'll be seeing the next show, that is, we tape a new show every other week, with Winona LaDuke, an indigenous people and environmental activist, will be our guest, and we're also working on a show on immigration issues in Iowa. You've been watching Iowa News and Views. Again, my name's Joe Balcom. Remember, this is just a TV program, and what's important is what you're doing in your community each and every day to make it a better place. David's working on it. Mary's working on it. Your turn. We'll see you again next time.